Hey everybody, sorry for the couple minute delay. I realized I had made some adjustments to my camera and it was zoomed in too much. So you were basically just staring at my forehead. So I had to go and load a different application that controls that. But I am live now and I will be ready soon for a moment to kick us into three new watch releases. One from Seiko, one from Frederique Constant, and one from Timex that I thought would be interesting for us to discuss today. But on the wrist today, this time I do have this Swatch Flower Bay. It's one of the Hong Kong watches that they have at the shop there. I got it through Joma Shop. Didn't wear it last week because there is a little bit, very, very slight bit of damage on the print, almost like something had scraped the band. So rather than send back such an inexpensive watch, I got them to give me a partial refund on it because they wouldn't send me a new band because they didn't have one, which I didn't expect. So anyway, so now the watch was even cheaper. And if if it bothers me, I can always just change the strap out. So, but as cheap as it was, I was like, I don't think this is worth returning because it's not even $100 watch. But anyway, so I do finally have it on the wrist. Probably will do something on it, like a review or something. I don't know if there's a lot of interest in that or not. But most of my review videos, quite frankly, don't do very well anyway. I just do them to kind of have a record because some of the stuff I own, there aren't videos on because even though I own a lot of boring watches, some of them are a little more off the beaten path, like the Parmigiani Tonda I had and things like that. A lot of them, you might find something with 1916 Company from Tim, but sometimes even those aren't covered there, even if they've had them in stock before. So let me go ahead and greet the chat, and then we will get underway because I am actually going to meet Koji, one of our frequent viewers, for lunch. He's actually in town in Kansas, and I do not want to be late to that, but it's timed in a way that I'll be able to at least do most of what I normally would here for the live stream. So good morning, Kevin. Welcome. Hope things are going well for you. And Tuna, thank you for being a 99-cent club member. I really appreciate that. And I hope you're having a really good weekend. And if others want to be a member of the 99-cent club, it costs a whole 99 cents a month. No pressure to do it, but there is a link in the video description if that is of interest to you. Underachieving Watch Collector. I see now that they're giving me the full real YouTube handles instead of the truncated name versions. I don't know why the app is doing that, but looking at the main feed, that's how it's coming across there as well. I suppose it's to be able to tell people apart more easily and no longer let people kind of clone and pretend to be others. I'd never really encountered that on this channel, but this channel is tiny and it's probably a problem on bigger ones. But you know what isn't a problem? Seiko. Seiko's not a problem. All right. Misaligned bezels and chapter rings aside, and price. So, all right. So there are a few things. But what I think in terms of Seiko's direction, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but anyway, let me just jump into it. So, but their quartz line, I have not talked about a quartz Seiko in a really long time. I'm trying to remember last time I did, and I don't remember. So anyway, we have here the Seiko Rotocall. So this is a throwback. This is from Hodinkee, link again in the video description so you can go and actually read about the watches. 3 different bezel colorways that are here, but the watches themselves are the same regardless of what color it is. So these are 37 millimeter in diameter. They're about 43.5 millimeter lug to lug on the model. Thickness is 10.6 millimeters, and obviously, since it's digital, we actually have, you probably can make it out like the alarm and stuff or the 24-hour mode. They have a number of features. The movement module supports 1/100th of a second chronograph. It has a dual time capability. It has alarms, as I mentioned, countdown timer. You can, like, there's a mode switch, bezel function thing going on. So basically, if you're like familiar with G-Shocks, this has most of those capabilities. Some of those, I guess it depends on the G-Shock, but it's got a lot of the similar capabilities. This is powered by the A284. So it obviously is a digital watch with an LCD screen. This is a quartz movement, plus or minus 20 seconds per month. So not a particularly accurate movement. However, it does run about 3 years on a battery, which is decent for a non-solar charging watch. And this does have 100 meters of water resistance. These are US priced retail at $550. So more than a lot of G-Shocks as well. But visually, I actually really like these. I'm not familiar with a lot of Seiko's back catalog. I'm not a Seiko collector. Even though I have owned a number of Seikos, as many of us who are collectors to sort of end up falling into that brand, it's almost inevitable. They have something for everyone. but I really haven't explored anything in their quartz lineup, even though I do own a Seiko quartz watch. But I actually think this aesthetically is really strong. In some ways, I would say I probably prefer this to the G-Shock. I definitely prefer this shape to the round G-Shocks. I do like the square G-Shock a lot, but I think these look really good. I think the bezel colorways look really, really nice. Obviously, I would say the blue-gray one is the most conservative of the bunch, but none of them are really out there. But the other ones have more playful blops of color, so to speak. I like the bezel. I like the way the shape looks. I think the module looks nice. I think even though it looks throwback, but it looks clean enough that doesn't feel kitsch. Kitsch is a food. It doesn't feel kitsch. So overall, uh, I thought that these were pretty compelling. Obviously, very modest sizing. So 37 millimeters, very unisex choice, 43.5 millimeter for the lug to lug means it's going to fit on basically any adult wrist. Maybe some people with larger wrists might be put off a little bit by this watch, which wouldn't surprise me though. The shape is with the bezel shape, it's interesting. So I feel like it looks a little bit bigger than it actually is. Not significantly so or anything. I don't treat it like a rectangle or anything like that. But overall, I thought that this is uh, pretty nice. And now I kind of wish I was familiar with the vintage lineup, but going down the vintage rabbit hole at any watch brand can be taxing, though I suppose mentally enjoyable for those that get into that sort of thing. But it's bad enough hearing about all those vintage Rolex references from all the podcasts that are obsessed with them. I think vintage Seiko might actually make my head explode. Here's a picture with the module not actually powered and without the bracelet on it, so you can kind of get a sense of its scale and everything. But $550. I'm gonna say maybe it's a tad. I mean, it is on bracelet. It's Seiko though, so I'm going to assume the bracelet is trashed here. But I've never had a good Seiko bracelet experience, and that includes Grand Seiko. But it looks nice, and I've often thought their bracelets look nice. I think this overall, I think this is a pretty visually appealing look. $550 wouldn't really put me off. If I really wanted one, I would say get it. But personally, I bet that these are going to end up pretty discounted. In fact, I don't even think you necessarily need to wait for gray. Authorized dealers often can sell Seikos for less than what they list at. So I would just say maybe wait a couple months and see what happens with the pricing. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe you could at least get $50 off of these, get it more around 500, maybe a little under 500. I think it'd be easier to pull the trigger at under 500. So I wouldn't look for much of a reduction, just personally. Like if I really wanted it, I wouldn't be, I don't feel like this is a terrible deal or anything. I just don't think it is a deal, if that makes sense. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I'll see what the chat has to say here. Well, I guess right now. Scotty, welcome to the live stream, by the way, Scotty. Greetings. What watch are you wearing to lunch? I'll wear the Swatch. I'll bring a few of my other models so Koji can look at them. Last time I only had the watch I wore, and he actually brought several of his, so I was able to look at. And he had a number of vintage dress watches. His interest in dress watches is similar to. We probably like different dress watches, but that we both are predominantly into dress watches is something that's pretty different from a lot of you who tend to lean more sports watches or go anywhere, do anything style watches for obvious reasons. They're far more practical for most people. Tuna says, I have a Swatch System 51, just got it out of interest at the time. Yeah, I looked a bit at some of the System 51s, like not the Moon Swatch. I'm not really interested in the Moon Swatch. I when it came out, I was like everyone. I thought it was kind of cool. I don't know. I leaned a little more towards getting a full plastic or polymer watch like this rather than a bioceramic, even though I think they both feel fairly plasticky. But what I really was looking at was, and Swatch doesn't have a whole lot of them, but I wanted another red dial watch. And I used to, for those that don't know, I used to have a red dial watch. It was, well, here, I'll blow this back up so you can see it, but it was really red like this, very, kind of this radial brushing style red. The problem was I had it in the Orient Kano, and the Kano was, it was too big. Like it wasn't overhanging my wrist, but for me, I didn't like wearing the watch. The watch felt too big. Plus, Orient's bracelets are as good as Seiko's are. So I often wore it on a silicone band, and I ended up selling that watch a couple of years ago, I think. And I've been wanting to get another red watch again, but I don't wear red enough to want to spend a lot of money. So while I have plenty of red watches that I think are really cool, Omega's Aquaterra is a beautiful red dial watch. There is the Zenith Defy on a ladder bracelet. I really like that. That's like an oxblood, kind of like what you would get out of Oris, which Oris has a very nice red watch, but with the cathedral hands, I have no interest in it. So anyway, long story short, I saw this one and I didn't know what Flower Bay was, and and again, that's the name of the watch, but I think it's a reference to a harbor. It's not. I don't think it's literally called Flower Bay in Hong Kong, but I guess they sell a lot of flowers there. And the strap just has a bunch of iconography pictures. This has got some images that are reminiscent of Hong Kong, and I think it references one of the streets, major thoroughfare on Hong Kong. So ultimately, I then found out that this watch was sold. Like they have destination watches at all sorts of Swatch flagship stores. And so Hong Kong's had a few of them. This is one of them. And apparently it didn't sell very well. So because it's at Choma Shop. So anyway, that is how I ended up with that. Back to the pictures of the Seiko. All right, let's see. Tuna says, that is a nice piece of nostalgia from Seiko. Yeah, I guess some people call these like astronaut watches because I think it wasn't a part of any official mission like Omega or anything, but I guess some astronaut or astronauts wore these for the functionality back in the day. So there's a tie-in there if you're really into the space stuff, and I know a lot of collectors are. Tuna notes that he feels that the $550 seems rather expensive for a digital watch. Yes, that's why I would hope to get it a little bit less. I can't help but think of, obviously you can get like a Casio for a few bucks with a digital module, but even jumping into G-Shocks, you can readily find stuff $200 or less. The thing here is those don't come on bracelet, and I do want to factor that in, even though my hopes are not high for this bracelet. We'll just have to see what some reviewers say when they get their hands on it. I'm not planning to get one of these personally. The other thing is that I don't know if there's anything else special about the watch that would compel it. My biggest problem with the price point isn't that it's a digital module. It's that it's not solar charging. It doesn't seem to have any, no radio sync or Bluetooth connected. I wouldn't expect Bluetooth at this price even, but like it doesn't have a way to auto update the time. And so again, there are some check boxes in Casio's favor over this. This basically wins on style. Like that would be the thing it could win on, would be on style. But I don't want to totally discount the fact that it comes on a bracelet because G-Shocks generally don't. And that being said, we've seen G-Shock go into the thousands of dollars doing stuff. Like when we get to their metal watches, it gets up more into the higher $100 range. And this is a metal watch, not a resin cased watch. So that's probably part of it in play as well. I don't think it's a ripoff, I guess is what I'm saying. Scotty says it's the shape of a stop sign, which is telling me to stop from buying. Yes, but if it was like a blue stop sign, maybe you'd think of the red one kind of screams stop sign. I do agree. VB, welcome to the live stream, and thank you for being a 99 Club member. He says, good morning. I'm walking over to get in line for Wind Up New York City. I saw the watches last night at watch time. Now to see the ones I can't afford. I've seen a lot of people posting. I saw people posting about those Manhattan Studio Underdog Fairer collaboration watches. That's a pretty good color. That's a brown that actually looks good. Brown's difficult for watches, and I like brown dial watches when they're executed well. Just a lot of them, you walk a line where a brown color, does it look interesting or does it look like a bowel movement? Like that's always the risk. Sometimes when people strive for a chocolate look, it might not come across as chocolate. So, but that one with that more like a red cherry poured in and diluted, to me, it plays like a brown, like a whiskey almost. But anyway, it's a pretty nice looking dial, I think. Reminds me very much of Moser, actually. But those are limited, I know. Underachieving says, Seiko doesn't make the worst bracelets. That title goes to Vostok. I have never handled a Vostok bracelet. I did have a Vostok back in the day, but it came on a leather strap. And I'm sure in the most technical sense, guys, it was leather, but it felt like wax. It was that cheap. But that's an interesting thing because talking about, so this Swatch, like coming in, other than I do like the silicone band. Like it feels cheap, but silicone's pretty comfortable even in a cheap format. Which is why I've often thrown watches on silicone bands. But like packaging wise, the Vostok was better. Nothing special, but it fully encased the watch. Like the reason why I imagine there was a little scratch in the band on the print job on the band is because the box is open face. It's like a clamshell, but it's open face. There was no cover, no plastic or anything to protect the watch. And I mean, the crystal wasn't exposed. It was the band that was exposed. There's nothing in the box that would have, I assume it arrived at Jelma Shop scratch because there's nothing in the box that would have scratched it. But anyway, I'm just like, it's been a fascinating case. And I'm sure some of you have handled swatches before. Maybe this wasn't surprising to you, but I'm amazed at how cheap, like looking to see how they cut corners to get the watches as cheap as they do. Like the buckle being plastic on the just the fold through being plastic, like it was metal on the Vostok. The case of course is plastic. I expected the poly plastic crystal, so for polywatch polishing. Again, Vostok also uses those plexiglass crystals. So anyway, but just very, very interesting. And now the Vostok wasn't a quartz, but oh my, I've heard this about Timex too, but wow, this thing is loud. Like I can hear the ticking. I can hear the ticking when I'm on the other side of the room if the room is quiet. I'm constantly hearing this tick right now because it's on my wrist. Wow, is this movement loud? Holy cow. Very, very surprising. But interesting nonetheless. It's all about the experience. So an interesting experience. Another brand that I had, so this is my first Swatch. I've never owned a Swatch before. Another brand I had never owned a watch from is Frederique Constant. And so this article is from Monochrome, but I want to talk a little bit about this. The Frederique Constant Classiques Carrée, that's probably not how you're supposed to say that, Carrée Moonphase Automatic. Now, the Carrée line is one that I associate more with their women's watch line, but this is they put it in the classic section. So anyway, they have a couple colorways. We've got sort of the silver dialed version with, there's like a guilloche style pattern in the center. And then there's the same basic concept, but in blue, which is probably more appealing to most of you. So I'm going to put that one up right now. Again, you can go read the video. Again, you can read the article in the video description link that I have provided and look at the pictures to your heart's content. So this is basically a rectangular watch. Actually, the shape very much reminds me of the Gondola line out of Patek Philippe. So this is about 30 millimeters wide. And so, and its height, so essentially its lug to lug is 42.3 millimeters. So this is a little bit shorter, about a millimeter shorter than the Seiko Rotocall we just discussed, to give you a sense of wrist presence. So this is a very unisex style height. Most wrists that are not overly large will probably be able to pull it off. Larger wrists might be uncomfortable doing that. However, given it is a more rectangular shape than the Rotocall is, this, I think, it will look better than you might think with a bigger. I bet it would look better on a bigger wrist than a Rotocall would. Long story short. Thickness on this watch is also about the same. It's only a little bit thinner, even though it has the Moonphase than that Rotocall. This is 10.5 millimeters thick. And it is driven by the FC333. So that's basically the Moonphase version of the SW200 is my understanding. So FC333 is 38-hour power reserve, 4 hertz movement, obviously has the Moonphase complication included. So those are the basic specifications. I did not write down the water resistance. I bet you it's 30 meters. Price of this watch is $1,895. Let's see if I can confirm water resistance. Yes, or 30 meters water. That's pretty standard for anything with a Moonphase. It does have a display case back, so you can actually see the movement. There's a little bit of decoration to the base plate. It's pretty basic though. This is a pretty basic setup. And of course, not shaped. I wouldn't expect a shaped movement at this price, especially since the FC333 is essentially a branded version of an ETA or Solida. But pretty attractive execution. I do feel like it's cribbed pretty heavily, actually, from the gondolas. Depends which gondola we talk about, but fairly aggressive hour markers. You see the pointed, almost pencil-like tips to that. That's something I've seen in gondolas before. Not quite this shape. Again, it's got its own DNA to it. The handset, again, straight up out of what you would expect out of a gondola line. Moonphase placement is conservative and attractive. I do like the radial brushing. Reminds me a bit of some of the stuff that I've seen out of JLC, which of course is another famous rectangular watch maker. So overall, I think these look really, really good. The silver version, actually, I feel is a more traditional color for this sort of thing. But personally, and I do like silver dial watches quite a bit when they're done with some sort of finishing. I think the blue with the radial brushing looks better than the silver does with that same brushing in this instance. So I actually like this better, even though the Moonphase stands out more in the silver version of the watch. The price point, so $1,900 basically US. Yeah, it's stainless steel watch. It's fine. You can get a cheaper Moonphase if you want. I've heard very good things about Frederique Constant and how they execute on their watches. Having not really handled them, I can't and I don't want to opine about quality and all of that. But sub $2,000 for anything that's using a baseline ETA or Solita, most people seem pretty accepting. Once you start getting over $2,000, people start to get upset if it's not an in-house movement. I don't agree with that. I just I think people I think at that stage, it's okay to be judgmental of it. I mean, guys, it's your money. Always be as judgmental as you want on anything that you want. But I would just start asking myself, are they modifying the movement? So is it EBOSH in some way, or are they decorating the movement? I would start to have more demands for like machine decoration and stuff when we're getting north of $2,000, or that they made modifications in some capacity to the movement. My biggest gripe, so the decision to do this display case back, I actually think their rotor looks pretty nice. This is okay. I'm not a huge fan of looking at rounded movements and square cases, but it's basically impossible to do otherwise unless you're getting up into 5-figure watches. So I would have probably said I would rather this though be closed case back personally, but again, that's a personal choice. I do like the onion crown. I think it actually looks okay on this watch, and that's pretty different for a model like this. Like you would not see that out of JLC or out of Patek. The onion crown is stuff I associate with Stova and Chrono Swiss, but and Laco. But overall, I think they do a pretty good job on the watch. So it's nice. It's not for me. I would probably just look for a used rectangular watch from a higher end manufacturer, but you're probably not going to find one under 2,000 unless you go real vintage. So it's sort of a balancing act, but I think they've done a decent job. It doesn't feel particularly original, but it has its own style. My biggest gripe besides the display case back is the movement, just the 38-hour movement. So it is an automatic movement, so you can put it on a winder. Setting Moonphases is a pain. Especially if you want it to be right and you let your watch run down. I've only ever had one Moonphase, and I did not have a winder at the time, and so it got kind of annoying because you have to look up the moon table. I had to get out my little toothpick and because it had the sunken, it was a glass Suta, so it had the sunken mode to push and modify, and manipulate the module. So I would say if you're going to get this and you rotate watches a lot, you're going to want a winder because this thing's going to run dead in under 2 days. So I don't love the 38-hour power reserve because it's not much of a grace period on the Moonphase. And that's my biggest complaint. So anyway, those are my thoughts. But let me see what you guys happen to think. Tuna says, a nice looking watch. Frederique Constant also do their own perpetual calendar. That is one impressive piece of watchmaking for the price. Again, I've heard a lot of praise about Frederique Constant. I've checked them out before. I've never had them get them out of the case and let me handle them. But it's an interesting brand, and I do think it's probably underappreciated, broadly speaking, as a brand. So I thought, anyway, I saw this and I thought it looked pretty nice. I'm not a huge fan of the back, as I noted. Not a huge fan of the movement. But this, for under $2,000, this is pretty clean looking. And this is, again, once they start hitting used, and this may hit gray, if you want to get something, closer to 1,500 maybe, starts to become better and better of a deal. But this isn't a bad deal for a Moonphase watch, especially for this shape. That's most of the Moonphases you're going to run into in the lower price point are going to be round watches. And I always have a soft spot for the rectangular watch. I think it's probably one of the strongest dress watch categories that there is, because it's so unique and it's basically not suited for much of anything outside of being a dress watch. Tuna also asks, don't Oris do a rectangular watch? Yes, they do. In fact, I could probably load it up here quickly, but I don't. And it looks nice also, but I think its dial, if I remember right, looks a lot more like the Reverso, like almost straight up like that. And I personally think the Frederique Constant watch looks a lot better. All right, so I've loaded up one here from WatchMax. So you see, like, you got the whole railroad track and everything. This is like all JLC through and through style. But comparing this to the like, this is just a much sharper looking watch. I like Oris as a brand a lot, and I've owned an Oris watch. I'm not particularly fond of their rectangular watch. It feels a little too homage to me of the Reverso. If you love the Reverso, this is going to get you closer than the Frederique would. I don't like that they have the date on it. I mean, they've conservatively placed it, but it feels like they just didn't want to use a no date movement, and whatever. It's a nice enough looking watch, but I just, like, compared to, sorry, that's our next watch we're going to talk about, but compared to this is a much nicer looking watch. That being said, price point wise, this is cheaper. All right, so it retailed at $2,400. Now WatchMax is a discount site. It's a great dealer, so they're selling at $1,440, but $2,400 versus this for under $2,000. I would get the Frederique, absolutely, absolutely. So, Underachieving says Frederique Constant makes nice looking watches for muggles, but watch nerds seem to ignore FC. You know, that's a good point, and I haven't really thought about it. I assume, you know, it gets to, they operate. It's like Raymond Weil, right? They operate in a space where they're doing more than the low end watches would, but you also have higher end watches with better name recognition, maybe more interesting movements, maybe better movements, depends, like power reserve. So it just depends. But when you think about that, there's a used market, and that the pricing on those start to make those better, and by better, I mean better known, better spec'd, or maybe just more expensively priced. And you use that as your barometer for better, even though, like, I would argue the Frederique is a better watch at the retail price than the Oris rectangular watches. Anyway, long story short, that used market, you get to the point where, like, all of my expensive watches have been bought used. Like, I'm trying to think, the most expensive watch, or gray, used or gray. I'm trying to think the most expensive watch I've basically bought retail, I think, was under $2,000. Everything else I either got through a gray dealer or I bought used. Like my Reverso used, you know, Longa used, both of my Glasutas I've had used, like, because the price comes down so much now. That doesn't come down to this. It doesn't come down to Frederique Constant pricing. But my point is that pressure is there when you start thinking about, like, as Tuna noted, Frederique Constant and Raymond Weil are both sadly ignored. When we start looking at, like, at used Tudors, you're in the same price as the new Frederiques and stuff. And so, depending on the model. And so that's the rub, why I think that's the case, is you can start getting brands with, whether the watch is better or not, brands with better name cachet. And that matters if you maybe think you want to get rid of the watch later because it's going to be easier to sell. You buy a used watch, most of the value loss has already been sustained. So your retention on what you paid is much higher than buying one of these new. All of that, I think, puts pressure. And that's also why I think we don't see a lot of watches play in this space. Like, think about how many watch brands compete with Tudor at Tudor's retail price point. It's not a lot. You got to get closer to the $10,000 point, and then you see a lot of that competition where it's like, you know, Omega is competing with Rolex, is competing with IWC, is competing with Breitling. They aren't playing as much. They might have a few models, but they aren't playing as much with that at that Tudor price point. These brands are operating a little bit less than that, but they're so significantly priced above where a lot of micro brands are, for example. It's tough. It's tough for them, but I think it's an important segment of the market, because this is a sort of thing where someone might be like, I really want a nice dress watch. I don't want to buy used, or even used, like a used JLC is still going to be like over $4,000. I'd rather pay half as much and get a watch that's this attractive. And so there's a space for it, but yeah, the watch enthusiast world is not the one going gaga for them. But nonetheless, it's a very handsome watch. So I did want to talk about it. Third thing that I want to go ahead and cover, you already saw a glimpse of it, and that would be Timex. So you're probably, at first you would say, Timex, Dennis, you just talked about that like a month ago. It's like, yeah, I did, but I got to talk about another. I got to talk about another Timex now. Timex is like, I think I've talked more about Timex this year than I have the entire history of this channel up until 2025. But this is the Atelier GMT24 M1a automatic. So, okay. The last time we talked about Timex Atelier, we talked about a dive watch. So it seems like Timex is, if they're going to keep going like this, in fairly rapid succession, is rolling out more and more of these watches. So for those that don't know, a quick nutshell summary. So Timex, obviously very well known for, much like Swatch, making really inexpensive watches. They've got inexpensive quartz watches and they have inexpensive mechanical watches. Their design guru, I'm blanking on his name right now. So yeah, Giorgio Galli. So Galli, he has had a couple of limited edition models that were pretty interesting, with pretty really interesting bracelets, and pretty significant price points. Like the second one of his, I think, is around $2,000 US. I think you can still buy it from the Timex store because, again, Timex is undoubtedly running into the same issue we have seen from Seiko and we have seen from Citizen, which is when you, under the same brand, start going way up in price and you are known as an affordable brand, how many people are willing to can wrap their mind around that and accept that? And that it can be done, but it takes work. And I think the smartest way to deal with it is what Seiko did, which is just spin off Grand Seiko and say Grand Seiko is its own label. No, don't put Seiko on. I should probably rename, like Crador is a better name because it doesn't reek of Seiko it doesn't just say, well, it's a Grand Seiko. But Citizen has the same sort of struggle with the Citizen line being in there. Again, they don't have that perception so much in Japan, but overseas it's been tougher. So anyway, I keep saying long story short. So continuing on. So Galli did a few limited editions, but I think that was testing the waters. And what now they're doing is Timex has their feet in both ponds. They have their main foot in the affordable pond, but they've got their little itty bitty foot in the more expensive pond of Timex Atelier. So we're talking watches that are over $1,000 retail with better movements, better finishing, more interesting specification wise, some actual design language to it. And I think this is attractive. I actually like the dive watch we talked about last time we covered Timex more than this, but I think this comes across pretty decent looking, though maybe not as original. Well, the dive watch didn't necessarily feel super original either. But anyway, this is a 40 millimeter watch. I don't know what the lug to lug is. I didn't see it. Thickness, it's the thickest watch of the day. It's 12.7 millimeters thick. And this obviously has a GMT complication. The movement is a Swiss movement. It's called the Landeron 24 GMT. And the Landeron is very similar to I think it's the SW200 and the 2824 with the GMT complication. It's very similar. It's a 40-hour power reserve watch. So not much longer than what you would expect out of those old traditional Solitas and Eddas. Landeron is basically a clone of the Solita clone of the Edda. So that's sort of the space. It's a collar GMT function. Price on this rubber strap you kind of see in this photo is $1,350 US. It does also come on bracelet. I don't know if Hodinkee had any photos of it on bracelet. The bracelet version is $100 more, so $1,450. No, it looks like they were only given images of the strap version. So the rubber strap, which does have the quick release. But anyway, 100 meters water resistance, and I think that's all the news that's fit to print. So obviously Swiss movement. That's one of the things they've been doing with the Atelier line. I think overall, this is okay. It's hard not to get Explorer 2 vibes from the orange hand, granted with its own shape, but the 24-hour markings, granted they're not on a steel bezel, so I don't want to stretch this too far, but the font looks pretty similar to what Rolex does. in that regard. And you could probably argue similar for a lot of these hour marker loom pips. Nonetheless, it's a nice looking piece. Like I would definitely have no qualms about wearing one. Collar GMT, not surprising at this price point in particular. There are more affordable collar GMT movements than there are travel GMT movements. Signed crown, nice. I like the case shape that they're going with on the Atelier line. Yeah, it looks a little bit like it might be a bit of a pain to clean. Just get out a toothbrush, guys, or a Q-tip. It's not that hard. But my biggest issue actually has to do with the movement. So again, not the same total gripe because setting a GMT hand is not nearly as annoying as a Moonphase, but 40 hours of power reserve. This is an automatic. You may want to keep it on a winder if you rotate. Like I don't keep my Explorer 2 on a winder. I tell you though, sometimes I think about it because you can't just quick date it. You have to rotate the 12. You have to rotate the 24, well, the hour hand in its case because it's a travel style. But you have to rotate it all the way around to advance the date. You can't just advance the date. So for obvious, it has to do with how the movement tracks time. So I mean, you don't have a danger zone because of how it works, but anyway, it can be very tedious if you're, especially if you want to wear it and you're halfway, so you can't go forwards or backwards. It's going to take you forever, so to speak. Takes a few minutes, maybe is a better way to phrase it. So 40-hour power reserve, you having to adjust it is pretty short order if it's not on a winder. Other thing I need to point out about the this movement, you noticed, unlike a lot of 24-hour GMT, I shouldn't say 24-hour, but GMT watches, this does not have a date window. This is a very aesthetically, I get it. It's very attractive. This is a very odd decision, in my view, for a GMT watch. And my personal opinion, GMT watches should have date windows because there are time zone differences where the date involved may be different. And maybe the argument is with a collar GMT, that is less of an issue. I don't know. But I'm pointing it out because the Landeron 24 movement is a date movement. And the article from Hodinkee confirms this has a ghost date. I do not agree with a $1,000+ watch having a ghost date. I have only ever owned personally, and I've owned all sorts of watches, cheap watches, expensive watches. I've only ever owned one watch that has a ghost date position. And it's this Swatch. That's the only one. Everyone else, even my Stova I had was, I think they used a movement that had a date. They removed the ghost date when they modified the movement. It was a bit of an Ebosh designed movement. So my point is, for near on $1,500, I expect there not to be a ghost date, even if Timex is on the dial. So overall, I don't like this as much as the dive watch. It's nice looking. Like if it was a gift, I would wear it. I wouldn't be compelled to buy this model. But what it does for me is it makes me wonder what else they may come out with here in the future, because I am very curious about the Atelier line. I don't think I've owned a Timex since middle school, into high school when I got my first Citizen watch. And so they're tempting me to think about getting something because most of the more affordable Timex watches, there are the Marlins, which I have a watch that kind of has a dial like a Marlin, so I'm not really inclined to get that. And a lot of the other watches have Peanuts characters, and I like Peanuts characters, but I don't love Peanuts. So I don't really, my nostalgia vibe for remembering reading Peanuts in the newspapers on Sundays when I was a kid is not been enough. Like again, if I ended up with one, I would wear it, but it's not a novelty style watch I'm really compelled to get. So unless Timex does another novelty of something that is more of a touchstone for me, I'm not inclined to buy one of those. So this sort of space, maybe. And I've never owned a collar GMT, so that could have tempted me, but the no date, I'm not really excited about the movement in this case. I don't hate it, but the ghost date decision, I'm like, guys, no. I get it because this was the movement that you could get that kept you within your price range, but oh, what a bad choice, what a bad choice in my opinion. But anyway, it is what it is. Let's see here. Catching up with the chat, Tuna says Frederique Constant, and we already talked about that. You had a follow-up though that with Maurice Lacroix is another one of those brands that is sadly ignored. Yes. In fact, I can't remember last time I talked about Maurice Lacroix on this channel. I've definitely seen new releases, so even I have been blowing them off. In fact, I've done that with, I think the last time I talked about Raymond Weil and talked about a watch was someone asked me to cover the brand. I don't normally do it. Tuna says, this is another great effort from Timex, but they seem to be on a roll. But how many will pay that kind of premium? I'm guessing that, well, I guess we'll find out. My thought is the experiments with Golly's limited editions have made them think there is enough of a market for them. And these are cheaper than the limited ones that they've done. So they've got that going for them. I'm really interested in the bracelet because the bracelet's got a fascinating link removal system. It's like right up there with Cartier's link removal system, where you can like toolless link removal, which I think is a really cool concept. I also think the way it looks, wish there was a picture of it here, but it's indented. The links are indented like the sides of the case. So I think it has this style to it, but as links, and I just think it blends really, like it's the Giorgio Golly's design language. I think I really like it, and it's very interesting that he's getting to do all of this with Timex. But yeah, hey, we're not just a drugstore brand watch. You can actually get higher end stuff. That is a hard bell to unring. And yes, it's smart that they're clearly describing this as its own line. So they're calling it the Atelier line. But Seiko has King Seiko under Seiko, and we question it, at least I do, all the time. Like, why would I pay this much for it to say King Seiko? That same movement is in another Seiko watch for $1,000 less. Is King Seiko's finishing better than the $1,000 less watch? I don't know. I like the shape of King Seiko's better, but I can't tell. Like with Grand Seiko, I know. Like I know the finishing is there. I know they got the Zarasu polishing. I know, the dial construction is better than what they do in mainline Seiko. Like there's clear distinctions, but it's easier when it's its own brand. Here, it gets a little tricky. And that's why I think the analogy for Timex Atelier has got to be Citizen with what was their Chronomaster lines. Now they're the Citizen line. The differences are there. Citizen does a very good job of explaining it, I think, at least a decent job, explaining it on their website. And maybe that's where Timex is trying to do. But nonetheless, like most people here in the US would, if they see the Citizen, they're gonna think it's a mall watch Citizen like any Citizen. They're not gonna think that it's like fancier or not. Like I wear my The Citizen a lot. I get the only compliments I really get. Yeah, and to be fair, how often does one get wristwatch compliments? But the only time I've never had someone say anything about my Citizen that wasn't a watch enthusiast. If I post a picture of my The Citizen on Watch Crunch, that is, in the words of Reddit, karma bait. Like I'll get a ton of upvotes on the Citizen, The Citizen. People love that dial. Any of the dials on the Citizen, they're great. So that's like instant like upvotes. Whereas I post a picture of my Seiko SRPK 17, no one comments on it. Like maybe it's because everyone owns one because they made 15,555 of them, but it's just not the same. So this sort of thing though would probably fly under the radar. The dial is lacquer. It's not, or excuse me, enamel. It's not Grand Fu enamel. They do a cold enameling process, but it is a shiny enamel that they polish. So this lighting, I don't feel does it justice to really show off and again, the dive watch was a better show off of the enamel. Actually, I kind of hate all of these images Hodinkee has. I hope they didn't take these themselves because I don't really love these photos. But anyway, it does have an enamel dial. So there's stuff there that again, we as collectors would appreciate because you ain't getting, a modern Seiko, affordable Seiko isn't giving you enamel dials, not in this day and age. But yeah, it's just, I think it's a stretch. I think their thought is they're going to sell this to enthusiasts and people like those that want to be on the edge, those who might want something a little higher end, and don't maybe and like the idea of it being a cheaper brand, trying to branch out and knowing the story of Grand Seiko, knowing the story of what Citizen's been trying to do, maybe trying to kind of get in on the ground floor, so to speak. That might be the angle. I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to pay off in the same way as it has for those brands, but we'll see. Hey, I mean, they got years possibly. If there's the money to try and do it, I guess we'll find out. Tuna says, I have a few modest Timex. I tend to buy these things on a whim, but never wear them. Yeah, that'll probably end up being I don't know how often this watch will stay. This doesn't hack either. That's not the way they save money. It doesn't hack. Now I have plenty of watches that don't hack. They're usually dress watches that decide never to upgrade their movements because why bother? Underachieving watch collector says that Timex looks nice, but I prefer this watch with a date and stick with quartz, with Bluetooth and maybe solar. That is my wish with the Rotocall we talked about. So these Seikos, I can the syncing with. I've never had a watch for Bluetooth sync. I've thought about getting a G-Shock with that because the radio sync is very finicky, like placement of the watch to have access to the radio tower. What I've learned with mine is don't try and sync it in the day. Let it sync at night. If I put it on the counter of my bathroom sink, which is close enough to an exterior wall, and I place it in a certain direction, it will sync. But it has to be at night, because the sun interferes with the radio waves too much in the day. So that I could live without. I so wish this was solar, though. I really do. I hate battery changes. That this is every 3 years is fine. It's fine enough, but I'll give Swatch credit. At least they make it easy to access the battery, and they'll do, I think, free battery swaps at their stores for their watches. But I've got piles of batteries. I probably got 20 different quartz watch style batteries here, and you can get, they're less than $1 a battery. It's not like a big deal. It's just a step that you have to do. And so for me, at this point, I want a capacitor or a rechargeable battery or something for quartz watches. I'm a pretty big believer in it. If they've got digital displays, it's usually pretty easy to mask the quartz module or excuse me, the recharging module, or at least integrate it in a way so that it looks like it's part of the watch and doesn't feel weird. But anyway, that's just me. But all right, we covered everything I planned to cover. So thank you guys for tuning in. I do appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and leave you with the rest of your weekend. And I'm going to head out and do stuff. So anyway, take care, everybody. I'll plan to be back next weekend with another watch topic. Don't know what it will be, of course. I'll plan that during the next week. And until then, I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.